remind me to start the recording, so I just did that. Thank you very much. Many of you are involved in some of these working groups. Two of them are very relevant to this group, and that's the One Health Working Group and the Sustainable Food Systems Working Group. So both fall under that umbrella of the ENRM framework. From the One Health Working Group is looking at intersections and interdependence of human, animal, and ecosystem health. And we've been working together through coordination, communication, policy responses, programming, coordination where possible, and much more to come. The Sustainable Food Systems Working Group is supporting the creation of a more equitable and sustainable global food system and focused on three broad topics to get started: changing dietary and consumption patterns, land and water use change, and overconsumption, including overconsumption of wild foods. So the Wild Meat Learning Group is connected to those different processes, but is different from those processes. But we want to make sure that we're all sharing information across the agency. So today, on the next slide, you'll see our agenda. So first, we've already given a little context and background to our learning group. Maria is going to run through our theory of change and highlight the learning questions we're digging into today. And then our featured speaker, Mario Mondele from the Carpe mission, is going to walk through their Chicken for Everyone program. And then we'll have a chance to get into some Q&A and discussion. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Maria, who's going to walk us through our wild meat theory of change and our learning questions. And Maria, you're still on mute.
Yes, I just figured. Thank you, Natalie. Yeah, just to add more background context to this learning group, I will slowly walk you through the wild meat theory of change. So starting on the right side, the desired outcome for biodiversity is to improve conservation of wildlife species that are targeted for trade and consumption. And for the human well-being, the desired outcomes are to reduce risk to zoonotic diseases, improve food security and nutrition, and increase household income. And to achieve these desired outcomes, the direct threats need to be addressed. And the assumption is that if unsustainable and illegal hunting for international trade, commercial urban consumption, and subsistence-based consumption is reduced, then it will lead to improved conservation outcomes and human well-being. And in addressing the direct threats, we've identified 4 key intervention areas. So first is reduce consumer preferences and desires for wild meat through targeted behavior change campaign. And this is really focusing on consumption of wild meat as a matter of preference or as a status symbol, which is more common in cities or peri-urban areas, particularly more common in Asia and some parts in Africa as well. The second key intervention area is to reduce consumer needs for wild meat by promoting alternative economic enterprises for hunters, traders, and sellers, and by increasing sustainable production of safe and desirable food alternatives to wild meat. So this one is focusing more on consumers who rely on wild meat for their nutritional needs and livelihoods. And the third key intervention area is about regulating urban wild meat commodity chain by enhancing regulating urban areas where wild meat trade is legal, by improving and harmonizing legal and policy frameworks, and by strengthening institutional capacity to improve monitoring, law enforcement, and prosecution for illegal wild meat hunting and trade. And this really looks at the market and the value chain of wild meat, particularly in urban or peri-urban areas. And the fourth key intervention area, lastly, is to maintain rural access to wild meat for subsistence consumption by regulating sustainable subsistence hunting, by strengthening protected area management, and by strengthening institutional capacity for monitoring, law enforcement, and prosecution for illegal wild meat hunting and trade. And this one focuses more on making subsistence hunting more sustainable and maintaining access to wild meat for people in rural areas who need wild meat the most. So for today's webinar, we will be focusing and learn more about these two key intervention areas highlighted on the slide deck. So the reduce consumer preferences through behavior change campaigns and reduce consumer needs for wild meat through provision of alternative proteins and livelihoods. So after we developed the theory of change, we worked with some of you early this year to identify information gaps and learning questions. And these are the set of learning questions we identified for this learning group. And for today's webinar, we will be focusing on the first 3 learning questions. So these 3 learning questions correspond to the 2 key intervention areas that I highlighted in the previous slides. So learning question 1A, for example, what are the barriers and incentives that motivate urban and peri-urban non-subsistence demand for and consumption of wild meat? This is relevant to this key intervention area of reducing consumer preferences and desires for wild meat. And same goes for learning question 1B. What behavior change approaches are effective in overcoming these barriers or leveraging these incentives for changing wild meat demand and consumption behavior? Learning question number 2, how effective is alternative protein substitution for subsistence level consumption of wild meat? This is relevant to this key intervention area of reducing consumer needs for wild meat through provision of alternative proteins and livelihoods. So these are the learning questions that we will be focusing more today or tackling today with help of Mario. And hopefully that was a helpful context. Now I'll turn it over to Natalie for additional resources about our cross-mission learning groups.
Thanks, Maria. So on the next slide, y'all will see that our wild meat learning group is just one part of a larger set of learning groups that we've been supporting for the past 7, 8 years since the beginning of MI2. So we're very happy to join this group of folks. And later on, we'll be giving you a plug for our new website and asking you what you would like to see on that website. And with that, on the next slide, I'd like to introduce to everyone Mario Mandele, who's a program management specialist for USAID Congo and the embassy in Brazzaville. And he's worked in that position for about the past 5 years. Before joining USAID, he worked for 4 years dealing with international law enforcement academy training programs, and he was an FSN investigator. So before joining the embassy, he worked with the Office of the Mayor of Brazzaville in urban development programs. So Mario really is a great person to address these issues because he comes from a background that's not only conservation. He's working on various aspects of this project, which certainly takes into consideration economic development and protein needs and market systems. So we're very happy to have Mario here to walk us through the Sosopona Moto Nyonso, or Chicken for Everyone project. Mario, take it away.
Thank you everyone, and thank you for having me in this webinar. And first comment is I congratulate Natalie for the pronunciation of the title of this project in Lingala. Sosopona Motonyoso, you said it better than I would do. Thank you. So we're going to go directly to the next slide. I understand I have 20 minutes or 25 minutes for the presentation. This will determine how deeply I will speak about each item here or each point. Well, activity summary. As you can read, the vision of this activity is to tackle the root causes of the threats to biodiversity. and to create enabling conditions for increased production, poultry production, and diversify rural livelihoods away from bushmeat trade. And this is biodiversity funding. It's a GDA. We have leveraged a funding with the World Poultry Foundation. The mission objectives is the biodiversity conservation, addressing bushmeat crisis. Why crisis? Because it has reached unsustainable levels, and the need to tackle this issue is very, very important and timely. Why do we have to do it now, or why are we doing it now? As you can see, we have in the northern part of Congo, in Wabalindoki National Park, chiefly, developing an ecotourism expansion project. And since it is ecotourism project, we need to have a touristic project and, touristic assets. I'm talking about what tourists will come to see, what tourists will come to enjoy to see. So, poaching and sustainable harvesting of bushmeat. The bushmeat crisis, generally speaking, is a major threat to that activity. Because if you don't do it now, in the future, we will miss to see some kind of species that tourists would like to see when they come, or to see around the park when they come, or in the park when they come. So the importance of carrying out this activity is to allow the expansion of tourism activity to grow positively in the interest of the future the tourists who are coming. Next slide. Well, here we can see that if we have an affordable production of the poultry in northern Congo, that increase and bushmeat value chain against agents of the opportunity to diversify their revenues. And we also have the law enforcement efforts in place that will contribute to reduce the bushmeat supply. And in addition, if we have a good social marketing campaign plan to reduce the demand, then we have the consumption of poultry that increases, since we now have an alternative protein source. And this will likely replace bushmeat in local diets. And then we will also have altogether the bushmeat agents having alternative activities, thus spending less time in the forest and less wildlife hunted, and the biodiversity consequently will get conserved. So the unsustainable level of bushmeat offtake will likely stop, and the threats to biodiversity will be reduced. And about law enforcement and demand reduction, we will discuss those in next slides. About the data collection, here we have identified the major collection areas. We have a poultry value chain in northern Congo. We have the bushmeat value chain in northern Congo, and we have the biodiversity threatened by bushmeat value chain, and we have the source of credit for poultry producers. I will speak about them randomly. I take the last point, the source of credit for poultry producers. Here, the data collected have led us to understanding that there is no access to traditional financial institutions providing loans for farmers. We have institutions, of course, we have banks, but the procedures to access the funding is very tedious. It's very complicated. And at the same time, you have farmers who are less interested in, less interested in seeking loans from those banks. That's the difficulty that's there. But we do have development programs happening in the north of Congo that can assist farmers with the funding. We have the World Bank's programs, the PADEC and the PEDAC. Those are World Bank programs. The PADEC is a projet d'appui au développement de l'entreprise et la compétitivité. It's kind of a project to support business development and competitiveness that provide small grants to small and medium enterprises in the north of Congo. This is an opportunity we can tap into to help our farmers have access to loans. We also have the World Bank's program called PEDAC, which is the Projet de Développement de l'Agriculture Commerciale. It's the project to support commercial agriculture development, and they are widely present in the north of Congo, and they also support NGO-led activities, small farmers, small producers, and contacts have been made with those institutions, with those programs, development programs. And by the time we enter the next phase, the development of the activity, we have resources to tap into to help the project access to credit, to loans. So for the bushmeat value chain in northern Congo, well, here, what I can say is, excuse me, we have conducted surveys that have led us to understand that all that's available in the north of Congo is the wild meat, bushmeat. And this has helped us determine who are active in the sector. This has helped us determine the dynamic of the roles of different actors in the bushmeat sector. And we have understood that women are much more involved in the bushmeat activity in terms of selling, street selling, household selling, market selling. We have 100% of women involved in this activity, while we have men mostly involved in hunting. And for those are the main trends for source of credit and bushmeat value chain in northern Congo. Now, the biodiversity threatened by bushmeat value chain, this activity is ongoing. As you know that this is a phased project, and we are in the first year of the project, which is dedicated to understanding the sector, collecting data, analyzing them in order to understand how we can better direct our implementation strategy the next year. So we are collecting information, and some information are still getting collected and under analysis, so the trends are not yet available. So this is the case for biodiversity threatened by bushmeat value chain. We will hire an ecology expert who will conduct the study and then let us know how the biodiversity is threatened by bushmeat value chain at what level. The question is, how does this influence decision making for future years? That's what I've just mentioned. We are at the 6-month implementation of this project. We have another 6 months for this year one of the project. And since it's a phased activity, the implementing partner, WCS, just submitted a second phase application, which is under review currently. And this will help us determine whether poultry production will really impact on bushmeat demand reduction. So this is the review that we are carrying on right now. So there are positive trends, early positive trends, but once the review is fully completed, we will know better. Next slide. Next slide is the barriers. We know that the question is barriers and incentives for non-subsistence demand in urban and peri-urban areas, but the activity is happening in a rural area. So the barriers are not the same in area than in a rural area. Although in the north of the country, we have Weso, which is an urban area, but we have a lot of rural areas around Weso. So we have, that's why I have put here both in rural areas and urban areas. So the constant availability of wild meat, excuse me, actually, to better phrase it, is the high price and the unavailability of wild meat in urban areas and peri-urban areas. That's the barrier there. But when it comes to rural area, the barrier changes, excuse me. Here then we have the lack of protein alternatives. That's a barrier. They would have certainly wanted to eat something different, but since it's not there, they are just taking what's there. And we have also the lack of economic opportunities, which is a barrier that prevents local communities to do something different than getting involved in the bushmeat trade. That's in rural areas. But for the incentives also, there are differences. So we will have, the dynamic will vary between the city of Weso and the rural areas around Weso, balancing both barriers and both incentives. In a rural area here, we will have as incentive the cash. It's a business. Bushmeat business brings a lot of trade, brings a lot of money to the communities. And plus it is free of access. They almost spend nothing to get the wild meat, but they get a lot of money out of that business. So that's an incentive. That's what makes it very attractive for people to go towards that business. But in urban area, speaking of Weso itself, we have the social norms, we have the tradition, we have the taste, we have the perception of high social status. We also have some of the incentives in the rural area. For example, it's a tradition to eat a bushmeat. Now, how is this activity gathering information about these issues? We conducted a value chain analysis, and some aspects of which are still ongoing. So the methods used are the surveys, interviews, and in interviews, we asked structured questions which are more targeted, and we also have open questions which allow the target people to provide the maximum information possible. And we also have the participatory observation. No need to interact with the target group surveyed, but we just watch the dynamic in the city. We watch the dynamic around the city and can learn about all the other results we have come up with. Next slide, please. Now, the behavior change approaches. Here, it is not a specific focus of this activity to have in place behavior change program. But the program will instead benefit from the SWIM, Sustainable Wildlife Management activity funded by the European Union, that has a big budget, if I can say so, $200,000 to organize a behavior change campaign next year, a 6-month behavior change campaign. And in terms of synergy, our project will leverage this opportunity and benefit from the results of that behavior change, and will contribute to for our project to achieve some of its objectives. The last point is this is not very effective, but it is important to mention it. The link between disease spillover cases related to wildlife and the health risk that's there. This is important to raise public awareness on that link. But as I've mentioned, this is not very effective because these are rural areas. Although Weso is a city, but it's in the rural areas surrounded by large forests. There's tradition there. Why do I say it's less effective? Communities just do not care much because they say our parents, our forefathers, our ancestors have been eating wild meat and nobody died of it. So we will not die because they didn't die of it. That's the conception, the perception, that's the tradition. And plus they say, yes, we don't eat that wild meat when it's raw. We cook it. So when we cook it, the risk, the health risk disappears. So those are the two trends that make this public awareness campaign on the link between disease spillover related to wild meat or wildlife and health risk. But it is important to do the public awareness because every little helps. If we get the maximum in one approach, the minimum we get in the other approach is helpful for the project. So if the public awareness on zoonotic diseases can help a minimum number of people understand and then change their behavior, then that's a good thing. Next step, next slide. Effectiveness of alternative proteins for subsistence. Here the question is if it is effective to have an alternative protein for subsistence level. Well, it depends. Here we have, when we make alternative protein source for our project, is about chicken, more available and at low cost. I said not necessarily cheaper than wild meat. Why do I say that? Because wild meat is access free almost. But the chicken locally or domestically produced will have a cost. But if we have that cost lower than in urban areas like here in Brazzaville, it's where it's around $6, and if you can have it at $1.50 or something in the like, then the other aspect is if we can combine the effort of making chicken, because I'm speaking of chicken, available with the risk associated with hunting, the long time, the tediousness, the difficulty that's there to go in the bush for days to get something, then we will have a chance to educate people on balancing whether it's worth spending a day long in the forest to get wild meat versus to spending $2.50 or $2 and have a locally produced, domestically produced protein, so chicken. So this comes with education. Chicken will still be a bit more expensive than wild meat, but less expensive than the average in the country. That's the aim of the project. By producing chicken and by educating communities about the risks associated with hunting, health risk, etc., we can get a good balance to have people understand it's worth going towards domestically produced protein, so chicken. Next slide. So here we have the synergies that will benefit this chicken project. We have the questionnaire interventions and those focused on zoonotic disease, food security, and household income, etc. For the synergies, we have the WCS anti-poaching surveillance and control unit that's doing a great job with the support of the Ministry of Forest Economy and the support of the CIB, which is a private sector forestry, a timber company. It's a timber company that provides also funding resources and resources to carry out this law enforcement activity within the use lab, WCS use lab. We also have the Sustainable Wildlife Management Project by the European Union that will, as I said earlier, carry out a 6-month campaign next year, and next year will correspond to the year 1 of the implementation of the poultry activity, because currently it's the feasibility studies, but as of next year, we will go towards the implementation of this activity. And this public awareness campaign by the SWIM project will be timely, will be very important, and we will benefit a lot from the results of this activity. And I previously discussed the World Bank development programs for the development of commercial agriculture and the development of medium and small enterprises. One of the projects, I think is the first, will end next year, late next year, and the other one will end in 2023. So we will have time to engage with them and get the necessary support needed for our farmers. The farmers that we support have a well implementation phase of the project. And one thing that's also of importance is the agriculture sector, because we have maize producers in the north of the country, in Weso and in the surrounding areas. And we had initial contacts with them to determine how the collaboration can be established between our activity and their activity, in the sense where their production can serve um, our activity in terms of poultry feed, which is also something that we are working on very efficiently, the poultry feed, because in the analysis that we conducted, what makes it difficult, challenging for the poultry activity to grow positively is the lack of poultry feed and veterinary services. And we are also working on those aspects to have our activity benefit from the enabling conditions that we will create on those. Next slide, please. Learning question number 6, the combination of strategic approaches. It's pretty much what I've discussed already earlier. We have the SWIMS behavior change campaign next year. We have law enforcement, where we have the government, the Republic of Congo's government through the Ministry of Forest Economy, and we have WCS. We also have CIB, the timber company, who do a lot of work to support the anti-poaching surveillance and control unit. I think that's all I had to say. If there's no next slide for me, I think I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mario. That was fantastic. That was such a wealth of information, and thank you for distilling it into a very short amount of time. We really appreciate you speaking to the details of your project and also looking at it through the lens of the learning questions that we're focusing on. So very much appreciated. We'll take just a few minutes now to take some questions from the audience. And thank you, Natalie, for putting the link to the slide deck in the chat box here. If you want to navigate to that slide in our slide deck, note your questions in any of these sticky notes, you're welcome to do that. You're also welcome to just type your questions, comments directly in the chat box. I see Andy Tobiasen already put some thoughts, some comments in the chat box. Or if you want to just go off of mute and speak up and ask your questions, you're welcome to do that.
And I'm just modeling how you can also raise your hand and we'll call on you. I'll kick off our questions here by asking to Mario and to other folks that are participating in today's call, if you see additional opportunities for linking with other sectors within USAID to support activities like this, since this is a, one way of looking at this project is it's not purely a conservation project. It's a livestock development project that has conservation outcomes. And that allows us to, fund it with biodiversity funding because because it meets the biodiversity code. But what other linkages are there that that could be made between the conservation aspects of this and the livestock aspects? And I wonder if Andrew Bisson has some thoughts on that as well. Go ahead, Andrew.
Okay, I hope you can hear me okay.
Yes, we can.
My apologies, I'm in motion trying to get my kids to a soccer camp. So my quick question on the poultry productivity is, tremendous losses are usually incurred in small-scale village-type production systems through diseases like Newcastle, and just some basic management approaches and some vaccination can significantly increase the output of backyard poultry sectors. And I don't know in that area of DRC just how many people keep poultry, but it's usually more than half of all households. So I just wonder, as well as improving the food, and I saw the link to the maize program, I just wonder to what extent might an animal health intervention, maybe in the form of women vaccinators to provide Newcastle disease vaccination, we've seen good success with that. I just wonder how we might learn from other poultry projects to find multiple ways to improve poultry productivity and thereby displace some of the bushmeat. Over.
Mario, are you able to address that one?
It broke a little bit on my hand, so just to make sure I understood his question, he's asking how can veterinary services impact the productivity of the poultry productivity, right?
That's right.
Okay. Well, as I mentioned that when we conducted our value chain analysis of the poultry, we found the barriers related to the poultry feed and veterinary services. And to speak of veterinary services, they are not very much available in the north of Congo, and which is why in this first phase of the project, we are collecting the maximum data possible to have the veterinary services not impact too much in the cost, for example, of the poultry, which is why we are studying the average cost of a chicken, for example, it's $6. Although the veterinary services can have some value added in the productivity of a chicken, that we can minimize that. So this is what we are working on, and we have had tremendous contacts with the Ministry of Agriculture and some expert in the veterinary services, and we are still working on determining how it will be good for our project to benefit from those services without negatively impacting the poultry productivity. So it is an ongoing work that we are doing.
Thanks, Mario. I see that Nico's got his hand up. Go ahead, Nico.
Just to add to what Mario just mentioned, one thing that we need to take into consideration here is that we are working with a private sector that has a wealth of experience in poultry production, and the species that they have chosen to promote is a species that is very resistant, fast growing, and very resistant in the tropic area. So we anticipate having less veterinary problems because of this particular species based on their experience that they have, the World Poultry Foundation, based on the experience that they have. I think that we are more, on the positive side to reduce, in maximum the risk of disease. Thank you. That's what I wanted to add.
Thank you, Nico.
Thank you. I wanted also to say that thanks, Nico, for raising the World Poultry Foundation. 2 points. The first one, we have the World Poultry Foundation as a partner to this project, and they have a successful initiative, which is African Poultry Multiplication Initiative that had tremendous results in both Nigeria and Tanzania. And in this project, we are seeking to duplicate that initiative here by contextualizing it to the realities of the Republic of Congo, and chiefly Northern Congo. That's the first thing. And the second is the race of chicken that we will be using. We will use the Sasso race, which is very resilient and which doesn't take too much poultry feed. So in partnership with Uzimat Chicken in Rwanda, we are developing paths of collaboration so that we can have that chicken race here that will be very much resilient and will be less demanding in terms of veterinary services and poultry feed. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much for kicking us off, Natalie, and for those responses. Just want to see if others have had a chance to weigh in. I see a couple of notes here from Andy and Tracy in the chat box. Andy, I think, had to sign off, but we've captured his points. He was particularly struck by the point about disease risk not being a very effective way to change behavior. He felt that was critical, given that might be a donor behavior change message, but that other messages are likely needed to actually change consumer behaviors. Andy points out the urban bushmeat campaign in Brazzaville and Kinshasa taking a very positive approach using influencers and social media to encourage change and shifts away from bushmeat. And then Tracy mentions another agribusiness economic opportunity is to support the development of small-scale businesses to provide the needed services we were just discussing and provide access to feed, vaccination, and other support. Great additions. Thank you so much. Are there other questions or thoughts from the group?
This is Nico. What I want to emphasize here is that this program, it is not a standalone program. As a standalone program, it would not really achieve the overall objective. It's a program that has to move along with the program to be able to really reach our overall objective. And that's what Mario was mentioning here in terms of leveraging. So, although the program is focused more on, getting the protein available, poultry available, it should move around with all the programs such as, law enforcement, what is agriculture, what is behavioral change campaign, and so on and so forth. So just to say that as a standalone program, no, we won't reach the overall objective, but we are leveraging on other activities to be able to reach our overall objective. That's an addition. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Nico. Well, if there aren't any other questions, Megan's just popped in the chat box. WCS's urban bushmeat campaign also found that consumers do not respond to messages about zoonotic disease risk. Okay, so furthering that observation that the messaging has to be appropriate for the consumers. And thanks for that addition, Nico. That really speaks to one of our learning questions of what combination of strategic approaches are really necessary to influence meaningful change in this threat of unsustainable bushmeat hunting. Andrew raised a hand here. Andrew, do you have a question?
It was more of a comment. Just so that people in Congo know, I worked on avian influenza with FAO and USAID funding. And we had a very similar finding that despite the fact that people were actually getting sick and dying of avian influenza, people still didn't have the fear that you might have expected around them catching it from poultry. And when we did some behavioral studies, the bigger motivator was the quality of the poultry. If they thought it came from a traditional production system, they felt that had a price premium and they were willing to pay more money for it. The fact that if it could be made safe was really of marginal economic interest to them. They really had either a limited amount of confidence that it truly was safe, or that they felt the risk was so minuscule anyway, and there was some merit in that the added price premium of guaranteeing it was safe wasn't really something that they could use as a marketing strategy. So similar, totally different diseases, totally different situations. Poultry is a common factor, but very similar finding in terms of people's attitudes and behavior towards risk. Over.
Great.
Thanks, Andrew. Oops, sorry.
Go ahead.
Thanks. That's a really good point, and that's similar to some results that that some of us found in my previous life before coming to USAID, doing focus group sessions with people living in the United States with African origins and family members on their attitudes about bushmeat, and overall the main point of view about the relative healthiness of bushmeat as opposed to domestic meat that's sold in plastic wrap in supermarkets is that it's much better for you. That was the deeply held belief, because as folks said, the animals feed on fresh organic grasses. That's something that we heard over and over and over again. So the level of baseline trust of if someone tries to come and say this is bad for you or dangerous for you, they're just not going to believe you, because that doesn't fit with their own background and values. And so a better strategy is to find out more deeply what are their values and how can we message to those. So I'm afraid we're getting very close to the end of our session today, but I wanted to thank everybody for a really good discussion and to ask one question of you, and that is to please fill out the webinar flash feedback Google form. I've put the link in the chat here. You can also get to it directly from the slides. And it's a very brief survey. It's basically, will you use this information? What else are you interested in exploring through this group? And what resources do you have to share? So this should just take you a minute to fill out. And so we would ask that y'all do that for us. It'll definitely help us as we move forward. This is really the first in a series of webinars that we'll be holding to explore the learning questions that we've identified. And so we really want you all to tell us what are some of the key resources that you think will help us to address these questions, particularly covering different regions of the world. Personally, I'm more familiar with bushmeat and wild meat issues in Africa than I am in other parts of the world. So I don't want that to influence. I don't want this to be only Central Africa. We want to make sure that we're covering a range of locations and issues. So please think about how you might contribute to this, how other projects that you're familiar with might contribute to this. And I did want to say that one of the things, a couple of presentations that we do want to have in the future are to learn, number one, learn from our colleagues at Fish and Wildlife Service who've been working on bushmeat programs for a number of years. But with, because they're squarely on the wildlife side, they're not looking at food security. They're not looking at health linkages. They're just looking at the conservation side. So we really bring something new and different to this coming from a development agency. There are also some great resources that we have through our long-term research collaboration with C4. So be on the lookout for those. And so please also share your ideas and suggestions. And Kate, yes, feel free to share with others. I think this week, because it's a holiday week, we had a slightly lower number of folks than we would otherwise, but it's been recorded and we'll definitely share the recording with folks so that they can catch up. I did share with the One Health and the Sustainable Food Systems group, so we can also share that more broadly. So feel free to do that. And we finally wanted to give a plug for USAID's biodiversity links, where you'll find more information about this learning group and others. Thank you all so much for participating. Mario, thank you so much for leading us through this discussion and sharing the project with us. It's been great, and I thank you all very much. Have a good day.
Thank you very much.
This was fabulous.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye all.
Thank you.